Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 7. So, we have since talked about cell organelles, how cells divide, and how cells harvest energy from food. We're now going to talk about how plants use sunlight to make food. We are still focusing on this objective, looking at that you will be able to understand that energy is stored, transferred, and transformed in living systems. Four kind of brief sections in Chapter 7. We're going to look at the intro to photosynthesis, the light reaction, the Calvin cycle, and then the global impact. So photosynthesis is the process by which plants, algae, and some protists and prokaryotes convert light energy to chemical energy that is stored in sugars from carbon dioxide and water. Chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a green pigment that is located inside the chloroplast of plants and algae and in the membranes of some prokaryotes. They are responsible for participating in the light-dependent part of the reaction. They are actually the pigment that captures light. The light reactions are the first two stages of photosynthesis, the steps in which the sunlight or the solar energy is absorbed and converted into chemical energy in the forms of ATP and NADPH. NADP plus or NADPH is an electron carrier that temporarily stores energized electrons that are produced during the light-dependent reactions. Carbon fixation is the incorporation of carbon from the atmosphere from CO2 into organic compounds that we then can consume in the form of food. So let's look at the intro to the light-dependent intro to photosynthesis as a whole. Life on Earth is powered and energized by the energy that is generated from the sun. No matter what type of organism we talk about, their initial source of energy comes into our ecosystem from the sun, in most cases. That is either a direct or an indirect relation to the sun. So humans indirectly rely on the sun for our primary source of energy. Without the sun, we wouldn't have plants. Without the plants, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have food or other foods to consume. Plants use photosynthesis in order to convert that solar energy into chemical energy. This chemical energy feeds the rest of life on Earth. It starts and occurs in the chloroplast of plants, and more specifically within the thylakoid. It's a two-part reaction. We have our light-dependent reaction that requires sunlight in order to take place, and our light-independent reaction, which can happen whether or not the sun is or is not available. The light-dependent reaction includes steps that convert sunlight into chemical energy, releasing oxygen back out into the atmosphere. And our light-independent reaction is called the Calvin cycle. This uses the products that are created in the light-dependent reaction in order to convert chemical energy into glucose or other sugars. The light-independent reaction most commonly takes place at night, but can still take place during the day. The light reaction is the photo part of photosynthesis, photo meaning light. So a photosystem is a light capturing unit of the chloroplast in the thylakoid membrane that consists of a reaction center complex surrounded by numerous light harvesting complexes. ATP synthase is the enzyme that catalyzes the reaction that adds a high energy phosphate group to a molecule of ADP, forming ATP. And photophosphorylation is the production of ATP by chemiosmosis during the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis. So we have two photosystems. photosystem 2, and photosystem 1. Now, photosystem 2 has to happen first. It was just discovered second, which is why we call it photosystem 2. Chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules in the thylakoid membrane absorb energy from sunlight. So a photon, which is an energy of sunlight, comes in, strikes our chlorophyll. Our chlorophyll splits, well, water molecule splits before it re-enters into photosystem 1, giving off water here, creating water here. This is now energized, this chlorophyll pigment, which is going to rise in energy up photosystem 2. It's going to get passed down an electron transport chain, making ATP, almost in the exact same way as the electron transport chain did in cellular respiration. Then pass back in, prepare this chlorophyll pigment with another photon of light coming in, energizing it, passing it down, to then go into our light-independent reactions, making a molecule of NADPH in the process. The steps of photosystem 2, so the first thing that happens is light is absorbed from sunlight. This happens on chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules that absorb the sunlight. Energy gets transformed to electrons. The highly energized electrons leave the chlorophyll and enter the electron transport chain, where they make molecules of ATP. The water molecules get split. The enzyme breaks down the water molecules. Oxygen and hydrogen come together, or they break apart. They break apart. Hydrogen gets passed into the photosystem 2, which can make the molecule of NADPH. Oxygen gets released as waste. Electrons replace those in the chlorophyll to absorb more energy as sunlight comes in. Those hydrogen ions get transported across the membrane of the electron transport chain, again in an identical way to that of cellular respiration, using active transport to create that chemiosmotic gradient. Photosystem 1 uses chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules in the thylakoid membrane to absorb additional energy from sunlight, using the electrons and the hydrogen ions from photosystem 2 to perform their process. In photosystem 2, or as in photosystem 2, chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules in the thylakoid membrane absorb energy from the sunlight. The electrons get energized and leave the molecule. This produces NADPH, which is used in the light-independent reactions to produce molecules of glucose. The production of ATP is the final step of the light-dependent reactions. The production of ATP depends on the hydrogen ions that build up inside the thylakoid membrane from photosystem 2 on a complex enzyme within the thylakoid membrane, very similarly to how this happens inside the mitochondria. So it starts with the hydrogen diffusion. Hydrogen ions flow through a protein channel inside the thylakoid membrane. The difference in hydrogen ion concentration is called the chemiosmotic gradient, and this produces ATP through the enzyme called ATP synthase. A summary of the light-dependent reactions. So water first. Water molecules get broken down into the hydrogen ions and oxygen. Oxygen is given off as waste. Hydrogen ions and their electrons are used to power the light-dependent reactions. The light that gets absorbed from sunlight is what is actually driving these reactions to happen. We have to have that energy from the sunlight in order for these to even be taking place. The electrons from water provide energy for hydrogen ion transport. and get added to NADPH or added to NADP plus to make NADPH. And ATP production is the flow of hydrogen ions through ATP synthase in order to make ATP. The Calvin cycle, which is the light independent reaction. The Calvin cycle is the second stage of photosynthesis. Like the citric acid cycle, it is a cyclic series of chemical reactions that occur in the stroma of chloroplasts using carbon dioxide, ATP, and NADPH produced in the light reactions in order to power this cycle to make sugar molecules. It's located inside the chloroplast, occurs whenever there is energy stored from the light dependent reaction, and is made through a series of reactions known as the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle cannot take place without those molecules from the light dependent reaction. The chemical reactions of the Calvin cycle use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and energy derived from ATP and NADPH to make simple sugars. This is the synthesis part of photosynthesis, meaning to make. The first step is that carbon dioxide comes in from the atmosphere and is added to the cycle of reactions. This makes a 5-carbon molecule into a 6-carbon molecule. That 5-carbon molecule is already existing inside of the cycle. We then have to break the 6-carbon molecule into 2 3-carbon molecules using ATP and NADPH from the light dependent reactions. We then can rearrange these 3-carbon molecules. One high energy 3-carbon molecule gets to exit the cycle. Most end up staying in the cycle, but one high energy one leaves the cycle. When 2 have left, then we have the ability to make a 6-carbon sugar such as glucose. That 3-carbon molecule that stays in the cycle gets recycled, rearranged, and ready to pick up another carbon dioxide when it's added to 2 more carbon molecule. A summary of the light dependent reactions. We have carbon dioxide enters the cycle from the atmosphere. ATP and NADPH come in from the light dependent reaction to transfer their energy. One high energy 3-carbon molecule is made for every 3 molecules of atmospheric carbon dioxide that are added to the cycle. 2 3-carbon molecules are bonded together to create a 6-carbon sugar. It takes 2 full turns of the Calvin cycle to make 1 glucose molecule. An ADP and NADPH cycle back to the light dependent reaction to keep this process going. There's a lot of functions of photosynthesis in the world. Not only do plants need it in order to make and store sugars for themselves, but they're also feeding the entire world. Both plants and animals release energy stored in sugars through cellular respiration. Photosynthesis does a lot more than just make sugar, but it also is providing the materials that that plant needs to grow and develop to reproduction. Starches store sugar until they are needed for energy. A lot of times, animals consume these starches for foods. We typically think of starches as like potatoes and things like that, but actually starches get stored in the form of fruits and vegetables. Additionally, plants use cellulose, so they use the glucose to build cellulose, which is a major part of plant structure and plant cell walls. Photosynthesis helps regulate the Earth's environment. Plants are taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. Animals are doing the opposite. We're taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide. The carbon atoms used to make the sugars come from the carbon dioxide gas in the atmosphere. Therefore, photosynthesis is a way of removing that carbon dioxide from Earth. Again, very important Here is your equation for photosynthesis. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, with light inside the chlorophyll will yield 1 molecule of sugar, 6 molecules of oxygen.